I can't do it anymore. I can't stay in the woods another day. Consequences be damned. But first, I want to get this out there. I have to tell someone, and you're here, so, well, I'll just tell you. I've been living in the woods for a little over a year now. Why? Yeah, well, I figured someone would ask, and I have an answer, but it might not be the one you expected. Without going into too much detail, let's just say I had a run-in with Johnny Law, and me and him, well, we didn't see eye to eye. It was either disappear and hope the heat died down, or get sent to prison. You know, the 3 strikes and you're out deal. Well, that was strike 3 for me. No, I'm not a nice guy. I'll be the first to admit it, but I never killed anyone. And I never hurt a kid, so put your mind at ease on those topics. Anyway, my life story, it ain't why we're here, is it? No. We're here for one fraction of my life. A single experience. The spring before last, I ran into the mountains and ended up near my parents' place. I was alone with no supplies, no cell phone, nothing but the clothes on my back and $3 in my wallet. Cops were looking for me. I had nowhere to turn. I hadn't seen my parents in years, and there was no way I would start up that relationship again under the current circumstances. Dad always said I was worthless and wouldn't amount to a hill of beans. He was right. Second night that I slept in the woods, I came up with a plan to get the supplies I would need. With any luck, I wouldn't get caught, and the supplies would last a while. Early the next morning, when I knew my parents would be sitting down to supper, I sneaked onto their property. It wasn't hard. The farm was large and they only had one beagle dog in the house. I took items from the barn, the garage, and the food storage. Did tell you I wasn't a nice person, right? Only a real shit steals from his parents. And I like to think that if my mother had known my reason, well, she would have been okay with it. You know, mothers are like that. They want to protect their children, help them, no matter what. But Dad, well, he would have put a load of buckshot in my ass. I can't say I blame him, though. So anyway, I hauled the stolen items up the mountain in an old saddlebag and an army duffel, putting as much distance between me and the farm as possible before sunrise, when good old Dad would be out and about, and undoubtedly notice he had been burglarized. I hiked until I came to a cave that I had seen when I was a kid. It wasn't near as big as I remembered, but then again, I had grown a lot since the last time I was there. Perspective. It's good to get a new perspective on an old thing, at least most of the time. The cave was only good for a couple of days, though. Cops would have their team of bloodhounds on my trail as soon as they visited my parents, found out what I had stolen. They'd know it was me, and that I was headed to the mountains. Although I would like to say the cops here are a bunch of blundering small-town dumbasses. I can't because, well, they're not. They're pretty smart. And technically, I could stay in the mountains from Tennessee all the way to Maine, but realistically, that was easier said than done. You see, it looked good on paper, you might say, but I couldn't stay on the trails because of the through hikers and day trippers following the Appalachian Trail. I kept moving with no destination in mind. My route was northerly most of the time, and I made sure to cross water when I could to help throw off the dogs, if they happened to search that long and far for me. But sometime around the end of the first month, I came to a place that looked untouched since the beginning of time. It had been at least 3 days since I had seen anything even remotely resembling a trail, and over a week since I had seen the last abandoned and forgotten logging or access roads. The top of the mountain opened to a skinny, flat area populated by huge, twisted trees that were older than any I had seen before. Taller mountains towered over me on all sides, and I imagined I felt about the same as any man adrift in the middle of the ocean would feel. With the isolation came a certain amount of relief. This was the place I had been searching out. No one could ever find me there, and to this day, I believe I was the only human to ever step foot in that place. I started marking the days on the face of a flat rock that rose out of the ground to a height of about 15 feet. At its base, it was probably 8 or 9 feet across. After a few weeks of hearing and seeing no one, not even the occasional plane flying overhead, I fashioned a makeshift shelter and attached it to the rock. In the next couple of months, I grew comfortable there, and even found a little cave a little down the way of the south side of the mountain, where I could make a more permanent residence. After a while, you become acclimated, and more, you become institutionalized. Then you simply don't want to rejoin the rat race, and you don't care to be around people. You forget how to be socially acceptable, which I had trouble to start with. I mean, obviously, that's what got me into this mess. I kept marking off days and settling into my new way of life. Every day, I seemed to burrow in a little deeper. Comfort, though, is just one of those things that never seems to hang around for too long for me. The first little blip on my radar that something was wrong with the place was when I started sensing things in the woods past my ring of perceived property. Of course, there had always been the natural intruders, raccoons and deer and squirrels, the normal forest critters. There had even been a couple of mountain lions who took an interest in me for a week, but they moved on. I take it they didn't like fire any better than any other animal. This was different. I didn't see the critters out there. I sensed them the way one senses danger before it's seen. That moment when you're sure you'll feel a serial killer's blade kiss your neck as you round the corner in the parking garage. It's that kind of feeling, that kind of sensing. With no concrete evidence that anything was out there, I tried to put it out of my mind and get back to being comfortable, but it didn't work. And things escalated through the following weeks, and I began to see tufts of long, unidentifiable black and gray hair stuck to the trunk of trees, strands on bushes. The positions made no sense either. Some of it was very low to the ground, and some was high up over my head on tree trunks, as if the owner slithered under foliage and climbed up the trees. And the smell reminded me of wet dog fur that has soured in the heat. I'd become adept at living off what I could find farther down the mountain. Berries and small game I could trap. And one day, while I was on my way to check the traps, I saw a dead deer. I knew immediately what it was by its legs, even though the rest of it was squished in unidentifiable mess. On closer inspection, I couldn't tell what had killed the deer, but I knew it had not been there the day before. Some of the black and gray hair was stuck to a tree trunk near the carcass, and a bloody sludgy trail led from the deer to a thicket of laurels, which I did not try to enter. If the beast had gone that way, I was going to leave it alone. You see, in my mind, we were just two beings who wanted privacy, who were in hiding for our own separate reasons. Nearing the thicket, I had the distinct feeling of being watched with malice, though. The feeling raised my hackles, and I got paranoid that someone was there, that someone had seen me. But the way my gut twisted made me think it was someone who meant harm, not just a wayward hiker who meant to pass by quietly. I went about my business quicker than usual. But things escalated after that day. I started finding small tufts of hair closer to where I slept. I knew I was going to have to move soon. My place was perfect, and I hated to give it up. With the unknown creature getting braver every night, I just saw no alternative. Now it dawned on me one day that I might be able to trap the animal, You know, the way I trapped rabbits and other small game. Granted, if it was the thing that had completely obliterated that deer, it would stand to reason I could not trap it with the skills and supplies I had on hand. But had it killed the deer, or had something else killed it and the creature merely made a meal out of it? The possibility remained with me as I stayed up one night to see if I could catch a glimpse of it. All its activity seemed nocturnal, and there was a good likelihood that if I could stay awake all night, well, I might see it. Then I would know for sure if I could build a trap to catch it. After almost falling asleep twice, I decided to climb up on the top of the rock and sit. If I fell asleep there, at least I wouldn't be on the ground where that thing could waltz right up and have a taste of my face. I remember that night. The breeze was cool against my face. The bright twinkling pinpoints of stars was hypnotizing as I lay back and stared up, wondering if there was life out there anywhere among the trillions of stars. The moon rose quickly over the trees and then seemed to hang between the horizon and the midpoint of the sky forever. It was full and bright, and without a cloud in sight, its light cast an eerie, silvery glow over the world below me. There was a fat possum that trundled across the campsite and toward the remains of my dinner. I didn't mind that he was cleaning up behind me. The more food he ate, the less I had to worry about it sitting around to attract bears or big cats. In the distance, two screech owls called to each other. To me, they sounded forlorn, grief-stricken even. Star-crossed lovers sharing their pain across the distance the best way they could, perhaps. And the symphony of the night was carried on the constant warbling drone of crickets, punctuated by a chorus of tree frogs, and the owls and the other night birds added to the melody. I closed my eyes, just forgetting for a few minutes why I had climbed the rock, why I was staying up all night, and just listened to each individual sound, and then to all of them combined into that awe-inspiring cacophony that sounded so much like music. The breeze died, and the music grew louder. I missed music on the radio, over bad connections, over the computer, my clunky old cell phone, even the jukebox down at Randy's roadside restaurant, over the system at Hal's bar. I just plain missed music, and this was as close to music as I had since running into the woods that day to escape the police. As I lay there with my eyes closed and a smile on my face, relaxing, I heard a section of nature's orchestra go silent. It was far out from me, but it was very noticeable. Like if you're listening to a loud thumping song and then all of a sudden, someone just shuts off the bass guitar. And then the tree frog stopped singing. I opened my eyes and sat up, peering towards the trees in the direction of the newly silenced critters. The owls fell quiet along the host of crickets between me and them, and I moved onto my stomach and eased forward to the edge of the rock and looked down. And the possum still stood at the cold fire pit, eating leftover rabbit and berries as if nothing were amiss. It didn't matter, though. I knew something was out there. A predator or a person. The sound of rushing water drifted to me. There were no creeks close enough for me to hear. I was sure of it. But there was the sound. It lasted for about 20 seconds and then stopped. When it started up again, the possum perked up, looking toward the sound, and then ran off in the opposite direction. At the edge of the clearing, a thunderous explosion of wings beating the air caused me to nearly scream as birds spewed up into the night sky, squawking as they fled the scene. A predator. My skin tightened. It was probably a big cat, a mountain lion perhaps. I had been lucky to not have run-ins with any thus far. Just like black bears and bobcats, they seemed to avoid the little mountain I was on. That was part of its charm. And a little voice in the back of my mind whispered, Yeah, but what if they avoid it because there's a worse predator up here? I couldn't think of a worse one than the big cats. We've had a few wolves in the past, but they're not nearly as prevalent as the mountain lions. And there are coyotes, but they were also absent from my little mountaintop retreat. And then the rushing water sound came again, closer this time. A pungent, acid smell puffed into my face and took my breath away as a breeze gusted past. Covering my face, I fought to breathe with the stench burning my eyes. And the sound of water hastened toward me, filling the night with its abrasive noise. When the sound stopped, it was immediately replaced by clacking and clicking sounds coming from all sides of the rock. Panicked, I shot to my knees and leaned over the edge. The moon gave enough light for me to see an anaconda-sized body wrapping around one side of the rock, but I saw no head. The creature had patches of black and gray fur. My heart lurched at the sheer size of it. It had to be at least 30 feet long and as big around as me. And I watched in frozen horror, knowing I was awake and wishing I wasn't, as it pressed itself into the rock and slithered. The sound was horrible, and I covered my ears to keep from screaming. Scales against rock. There was no escape if it came up, nowhere for me to hide and nowhere to run. Its head came into view, and my leg muscles turned to jelly. I was flat on my stomach again. The head was owl-like, minus the feathers. It continued its circuit, pressing deeper into the crevice where the rock and the earth met. The wood of my shelter splintered and cracked. The monster was destroying everything as it circled. Gagging at the smell, I rubbed at my stinging eyes. Suddenly, the creature slithered away from the rock and curled in the center of the clearing. I could barely breathe, partly from fear locking up my lungs, but I like to think mostly because of the skunk and ammonia smell the thing emitted. Using its beak, it pulled at the remaining tufts of filthy hair, the scales underneath glistening blackly as it cleared patch after patch. I don't know how long I was up there watching before the serpentine bastard finally retreated back down the mountain. I don't know how long it was before I could think straight and move either. But the sun had started to pink the sky in the east when I slid down the rock face and my feet hit the ground. Patches of fur with some scaly tissue clung to the rock all the way around. The damn thing had apparently been in some version of molting. I tried to grab a clump of the mucky fur so I would have proof, but it stung my eye. I knew I was leaving the woods, but I also knew I couldn't leave without getting proof of that aberration. Using the stick, I took some of the fur and put it in my remaining duffel, shouldered it, and headed out. Whatever was up there could have the mountain. You see, it had taken my sense of safety. It had thieved my love of the woods, and it robbed me of a decent sleep. My honest feeling now is that it's better to go on and face the music. Pull my time in the Iron Bar Motel, and not have to worry about being crushed and eaten by that thing.